Library, and on behalf of the entire staff, I want to welcome all of you to today's talk and briefly introduce Dr. Leonard Shyles. He earned his PhD from Ohio State University and has been an associate professor in the Department of Communication here at Villanova University since 1989. He has served also as the director of the Video Production Lab until 2000. His research focuses on the transition from analog to digital platforms across media and telecommunications institutions. He is also an expert in both qualitative and quantitative research methods. He has taught research methodology in the communications department since 1989 and has published widely in the fields of political communication, public communication, campaigns, and military propaganda analysis. 1,000-Hour War, Communication of the Gulf, 1999. In addition, he has also contributed to a wide selection of book chapters, collected works, and journal articles in both the communication and political disciplines. His most recent publications include Deciphering Cyberspace, Making the Most of Digital Communication Technology, published in 2003, and of course his most recent publication, The Art of Video Production. I give you Dr. Len Shyles.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And welcome and thank you all for meeting me today. This is why it is fun to be part of the academic community in general and the Villanova community in particular. To students, both graduates and undergraduates, both those majoring in communication with an interest in media and those outside the field with many other majors. To my colleagues who are here and friends from inside and outside the field, and I welcome also the staff members of the media support groups throughout the library who've provided this lovely venue and some awesome food. Thanks especially to Joe Lucia, Ann Ford, Jennifer Polhouse, Eric Hamburger, and anyone else I might have missed for helping me prepare my talk today. In preparation for today's talk, I realized that focusing just on my new book would miss a major opportunity to discuss more vital matters of a broader interest relevant to the topic of digital video, so important in the 2000s, issues that affect us all. First, I'd like to mention and describe some of these issues briefly, then focus on my book in a bit of detail. I'll show some brief excerpts from some recent video production activity, as well as some details pertaining to the writing of the book. Then I'll mention a bit of my current research dealing with diversity in the digital age, the new stuff coming later, a topic I hope will be recognized as relevant to the material that I cover now. After that, I hope we can have a discussion, a conversation, not just a Q&A, about how you are experiencing the digital transition in your own lives. Different people will have unique stories to tell and to share, and we can all profit from hearing them. So the shape of my talk will be conceptually like an hourglass with 3 sections. The top section focuses on the broader issues. The middle part focuses on the book itself, and the lower part broadens out once again to describe my future research interests related to my ongoing study of the digital transition. First, some broad concerns. Here are some of the topics I think are relevant to the digital video era that we are all part of as we move through our lives these days. One of the most important issues we face is a perennial one that Plato was aware of when he wrote his famous allegory of the cave, but maybe with even a more pervasive relevance today. It is the problem of separating fact from lie, from mistake, from fiction, from inaccuracy when watching television. Our new digital television era, DTV, raises anew the question of how we can separate the plausible from the preposterous in judging the veracity of claims suggested to us in the form of seductive, moving images accompanied by words and music with high production value and slickly edited, engaging displays. It is of the utmost importance to ask, who made this? What are its central claims? Does what it says square well with what else I know? Who says what to whom, through what channels, with what effect? Who paid for it? How are its central claims supported? When the material comes at us fast and pretty, do we have the ability to assess it properly? To identify and then refute intentional obfuscation, even falsehoods when they are embedded purposefully in what may be an otherwise accurate portrayal of other facts? This issue was most recently brought home to me once again as I observed my own son opening a website sent to him by a friend containing a full-length movie titled Zeitgeist. You may be familiar with it. Some of the material had been in another incarnation of the same stuff under a title called Loose Change a couple years ago, and some heads are shaking yes that they have been familiar with this material. Zeitgeist claims, among other things, that the reason the World Trade Towers fell the way they did was because bombs were planted inside them by the US government. My son watched with rapt attention for the full presentation. Many of the claims made in the movie were of questionable validity, but the problems, once again, were recognized as how to separate fact from fiction in such material. How do we do it? Several favorite cases I like to use in my teaching to illustrate how we do it include the falling of the Twin Towers, Elvis sightings, and today's latest proxy service by broadcast journalism of Miss Bhutto's return to Pakistan and the bombings that accompanied her return. If I asked for a raising of hands, how many believe that Bhutto did suffer bombings near her, how many hands would go up? You saw it on the newsstand yourselves? I dare say most of you were not. Yet you are willing to, quote, bet the house that there was some people killed when she got out of her motorcade. The beheadings of Daniel Pearl and Nick Berg are other cases. I'd bet the house they're dead. I was not anywhere near these terrorist acts. And don't forget the wire racks in the supermarket near the checkout counter featuring other tabloid newspapers screaming the headline, 100-pound woman gives birth to 400-pound baby. I ain't betting the house on that one. The function of the television news journalist in such coverage is to stand in as a proxy for us so that we can receive broader surveillance of the world's events and the environment in our absence. I like when Al Roker tells me it's time to take an umbrella. What makes us trust the New York Times over the National Enquirer is its accuracy in the past, its track record, relative to each other, that is. No infallibility claims here. And it's issuing reports that comport well with actual events. The anger of Frank Reynolds is a case in point. Some of you may remember Frank Reynolds was the ABC news anchor years ago in the 80s, especially when Ronald Reagan suffered an assassination attempt. And on the news live, the report came in, and Frank Reynolds faced the camera live on ABC News nationally to 220 some affiliate stations and said, James Brady is dead. 4 words. He reported James Brady's death. A Stringer reporter at the scene saw James Brady get shot and, without being too overly graphic, saw pieces of his skull separate from his head and saw his brains fall out on the road and ran to a payphone, no cell phones, and made a call, making an inference based on reasonable evidence that he was dead, or he was going to be very, very soon. Well, he was wrong. James Brady is not dead. James Brady is relatively disabled from what he suffered, but they managed to patch him up in the best way medical science could do. But my point to you is not to talk about medical science. My point to you today is to talk about Frank Reynolds' reaction when it was found out that he was not dead. He turned to the camera and, without risking losing my computer system here, banged on the podium really loud. Let's get it straight, someone. Let's get it right, someone. He was angry. And the real difference between the National Enquirer and the New York Times, or photos, because they both have photojournalists, they both have ads, they both have puzzles, they both have newsprint, they both have metal straps around stacks of them thrown on trucks and dumped off at kiosks. There's a lot about those two things that are the same. The really different thing between these two entities is a non-material abstract concept called credibility. And that's the thing that they don't want to lose the most. And that's why Frank Reynolds was so angry. The only difference that really counts is credibility. So how do we do it? We assess credibility in several ways, maybe more than what I'll mention, but I'll mention three. One is by corroboration. I knew that in my hometown of New York City that the Twin Towers had fallen. I saw them go up in 1970. I couldn't believe how quickly they were built. And if you had come to me and said in 1976, do you realize that by 1992 those towers will be gone? I would bet the house you'd be wrong. Well, that's not the case. They are gone. They're gone. I saw the hole with my own eyes. I didn't go down to the hole, ground zero, for a long time after the air had cleared and people no longer needed masks to walk around there. But when I went there and saw with my own eyes, I had no greater sense of belief that they were gone than when I saw it reported on the morning of 9/11, while Tuesday morning at 8:47, while I waited to teach my video production class. The belief didn't increase one iota. I 100% believe would have bet the house they were gone that day. Corroboration. ABC carried it, CBS, NBC, CNN, Fox, them carried it. Corroboration. A second thing that establishes credibility is a similar thing. It's known as independent scrutiny. It is what journalists require when they're doing their job well, that at least two independent sources confirm something as a fact. Lots of headlines are written in the form of questions. That's a weasel means of making headlines. But when you state a fact, you're supposed to have some journalistic integrity, and to do that you need independent scrutiny. That is also something that is done in grand jury investigations. Bring in witness one, everybody else get out. You listen to these 12 people listen to this person. Where were you on this night? What did you see? What did you do? What did he wear? What did she say? Okay, get out. Now bring in the next person. Okay, what they did. They are not going to leave witness two to listen to witness one. There's a reason why they do it that way. We want independent scrutiny, so that we can have corroboration and confirmation and cross-checking and triangulation and all of the things that let us get good at how we do it. The third thing I'll bring up is known as by comparing claims made against our own knowledge base. That is, we have a baseline of comparison against which to compare. It is known as our students, is roughly 20 years old students. They have 20 years of experience they bring to class. Teach a graduate course, you can have 30 years or 40 years of experience. They bring to class. They have a baseline of experience against which to judge the veracity of the claims. So there is recourse to validation, to verification, to veridicality, even in a postmodern world. And I can talk to that later. The grand jury investigation technique is instructed. The requirements to have at least two independent sources. Another issue, changing topics. Another issue we face in the wake of the digital transition is dealing with the brute blizzard of information bombarding us as we see what I call the amplification of all aspects of video. This is something that is less obvious to people outside my field. But I am here to say to you, after studying this stuff for 3+ decades, we are living through an incredible development that I like to call, in a single word, amplification of all aspects of video as a result of the transition from analog to digital platforms. A development that has given us an unprecedented proliferation of new media platforms while reducing costs for production hardware, making it possible for every Tom, Jane, and Harriet to produce, edit, store, and launch material in the form of streaming videos to the web at low cost. Lots of people put a God term on this. They call it the democratization of information. That's wonderful. But launch their attacks through satellite phones and laptops. We confiscate laptops from terrorists all the time that help intelligence agencies bust murderers. There's a bad side. In other words, if you stood in the center of a drawing of a waveform going out this way and a waveform going out this way, here's the bad part of it that's amplified in all directions, including sexual predators on infants and 3-year-olds. And over here is the good stuff, where the 5-year-old can study with a Japanese music teacher 3,000 and 10,000 miles away. Amplification. The means, the democratization, to have extra opportunities presented for us that are wonderful or terrible in equal measure. Another aspect of amplification is this decentralization of content. I no longer need to go to CBS or NBC or an affiliate studio to edit a television program. I can shoot the video on digital media. For the first time in my life, I can afford to buy a digital camera for a couple $1,000s. And now, with Final Cut Pro on an Apple software bench in my basement, as long as I know how to load my LaCie, I can put 350 gigabytes of television programming into a box no larger than, I mean, you can't put a peanut butter sandwich in the box. That's how little it is. And I can then edit it gorgeously. I can use GarageBand to put music tracks all over it, bathe it in music, and then not pay a copyright fee, because I made it myself, and then get my son to dump it onto the web and launch it using some other program that I'm not even familiar with, and then be just as big as AT&T on the website. Then I can watch it on a 16:9 format, 50-inch Panasonic plasma television set, or my iPod, amplifying it in smallness. Never had a 2-inch TV set before. I also don't need a hardwire connection to watch it. I could be flying somewhere on my airplane or on a train ride. I can watch it in the middle of the night with earphones playing almost Dolby stereo in my ears and not wake up the person next to me. Amplification, opportunities for this, decentralization and democratization, unbelievable revolution in production capability, making dissemination of questionable content available in a mouse click and the snap of a finger. How do we do it? These amplification issues abound, including access to content and equipment, as I've described, as well as capacity to produce, store, and launch new video programs. Finally, before I play my little videos, we are surveilled as never before. On a recent trip to London to see a cousin, he told me why he's ready to move. I said, why? You have a lovely home, you have a beautiful rose garden, everything is pretty, you have, a good job. He said, because I'm on video 300 times a day when I drive my car and when I walk around London. If I go to the National Gallery or the National Portrait Gallery or down the street or go to Regent's Park, you can't get away from it. It's insinuated in your life. You are surveilled. It's okay. I don't really care. I'm fine with it myself, but you guys must also feel a little sense of it being a bit intrusive. I like it on an elevator when my daughter's coming home 3 in the morning. It's good. When she goes up into a high-rise apartment building, that's good. I like that. But there are probably times when you look and you feel like kind of, get off my back. So we can talk about that as well. Those are some of the issues that I would have missed had I just given attention to my book. Those are the broad issues that drove me to write the book the way I did. One of the things I'd like to do now is to get to the small part of the hourglass and just talk a little bit about the book itself. And then I'll talk about what else I'd like to do and then open it up. First, let's watch 5 minutes and then a 1 minute close of a half-hour video.
Interested in getting a new bike, and even though I love my bike, I'd like to get a bigger wheel because I have a 650 wheel, and I'd like to upgrade it to a 700 wheel. And if I'm going to do that, I may as well look at other things I can upgrade. And apparently Harry does a great job of sizing people, so I think he's going to be a good shop to check out. So this is my machine.
We're going to do bike today?
Yeah, I want you to take a look at this and tell me what could be improved.
Since 1987, I've been the founder, owner, and proprietor of Cycle Sport, now in Media, Pennsylvania. My passion for building the best road bikes money can buy started in 1976. For 18 years, I worked in the family bike business with my father, who was a former six-day race mechanic, and my brother, who was a Pennsylvania state time trial champion. I became a bike racer myself and wanted to incorporate ideas I had into a superior product. Since 1976, I have been perfecting the art of frame building, and since 1997 in Media, Pennsylvania. When we came to Media, this shop, though closed, had been a bike shop for over 50 years, so we had a built-in clientele. People knew this as the Schwinn shop. The street-level part of the store is for retail sales and service. I use the basement as a workshop to build custom frames using hand tools, welding fixtures, lathes, and tube bending machines. We do everything here except the painting. We buy the raw materials, including tubes and fittings to hold the wheels, cables, crank, and head bearings. Then we cut the tubes to length, jig them up on a flat surface to hold them straight, and tack weld them. Then we do the final welding. Besides me, the team includes Dennis Tate, who does a lot of the hand and finish work on the frames, our welder Ed, and Drayton, who hangs the components on each frame to complete the bike. The componentry includes gears, shifters, wheels, seat, chain, handlebars, brakes, computer, and even water bottles. Custom frame building begins with an interview. We ask the customer about previous bikes they've owned, riding style, what they want to do with the bike, any special physical limitations or needs, and budget. Prices range widely depending on the materials used and the quality of the components. For a complete bike that we build, prices can go from $1,700 to $12,000 for a bike we built for the 2004 Olympics.
What we do is for every bike that we build, we generate a blueprint. This plan gives us all the dimensions, angles, basically all the information that we need to build the bike. Now the plan is generated based on the interview process that we do with the customer. The bike itself is broken up into a front and a back half, and we basically get the two halves, put them together, and then we have a finished product.
Materials account for a lot of the cost. We make a lot of bikes using chrome moly tubing, which is steel with chromium and molybdenum added to give the steel desired characteristics, including controlling something called grain growth. Grain is a molecular structure in the steel, and when you heat it up for welding, metal grain can clump together, making it weaker. To offset grain growth, steel makers add other elements to keep the grain small.
Okay, after this comes sections where he shows all of the methods of how he builds bicycles. He gives his 3 ways of doing it, and then comes the close.
My name is Jennifer Adams. I'm 25 years old and I am currently in law school. Because of my condition, I'm not able to run, but I'm physical and I've always liked sports and I like being in shape, and biking was a way for me to really stay in shape. About a year or so ago, after I'd gone through a couple of bikes, I realized that I was going to need something that was meant for some serious riding. I was going to need more of a road bike, but they don't make road bikes in the size that I would need. So I realized that I was going to need something made for me, something custom. So I was riding every day, 7 days a week, on bikes that were meant mainly for children. You know, they weren't meant to take the wear and tear of serious riding. So I was getting a little bit frustrated with that, and I was realizing that I was going to need something more for an adult. But they don't make bikes like that for someone my size. I did some research and got some names and went and met Harry and went and saw his I don't know if you would call it workshop. It seems more bigger than that. But saw where he makes bikes and saw his whole operation there, and talked with him and spoke with him about my needs and what I wanted and how he would be able to help me. And so a few months later, we made arrangements for him to make a bike for me, and he took my measurements and so that he could really make it custom, and it fit me perfectly. I mean, and it's been great. It's such a wonderful service that he provides. I mean, I feel like I owe him so much, but just he's made a dream come true for me, so it's been great.
In terms of where we're taking the company in the next 5 to 10 years, we want to get our bikes into other shops. Currently, if you want one of our bikes, you have to come to media. We size you up and build the bike, and if it's a custom, you pick it up in a couple of weeks. If it's one of our stock bikes, you could leave with it in a day or two. Our stock bikes are made to the same high quality level as the customs, but are made to pre-selected sizes. What that means is that the miters, welding, machining, hand finishing, and alignment are identical and to the highest levels of precision. So that if you're in a bike shop in California and want a bike by the weekend, we can ship out the frame, they can assemble it into the finished bike. That's what we want to do next, get our bikes into shops throughout the country.
The real purpose is to make a claim for television still being worthy of contemplation when used properly. If you're there to repair the world, to make the world a better place, to contribute something to helping others, and doing all of those kind of ninth grade civics things, you can make good TV, even in the world of Britney's news and stuff called news that's really not news anymore. And I don't even want to go into the long litany. I'm looking at my watch and seeing that we really don't have a lot of time. I had intended to read you a tract from Newton Minnow's 1961 Vast Wasteland speech and then show to what extent it is still unbelievably relevant to today, if not more so, because we have the 500-channel universe. And I had an item from Gloria Tristani, written in '99, who is an FCC commissioner, talking about the matter of public interest obligations of the TV broadcast licensee, even though the NAB, the National Association of Broadcasters, ended the National Association of Broadcasters code in 1981. So she's still fighting this fight. She's still in the view that, I agree with her, that the public interest is not just what interests the public. So I'll leave it at that in terms of those pieces of rhetoric. Because in 1934 Communication Act, we had the claim that we were supposed to have the affiliate stations of broadcast licensees who were trustees of the public serve the interest, convenience, and necessity of the listening area. And then by 1996, the Telecommunication Act of 96, which upgraded everything, did not let go of that three-word phrase, to serve the interest, convenience, and necessity of the listening area. So the notion of the public interest is still very much alive, even though the NAB does not think so. So I'm not going to go into the detail I wanted to with that in the interest of time, but,
My name is Jennifer Adams.
There, that's where I wanted to be. So now, just a brief couple mentions about the book itself, about what goes into doing it. If there are people here who want to do a book, here's what you're going to face. Aside from if you're quick, you'll have about 18 months of daily work, and that means 5 to 6 days of 6 hours a day, cramming and getting up early and driving in on weekends and that sort of thing. And the activities you'll face may not succeed. It may turn out you write a great book, and then it, quote, falls stillborn from the press. It may not be a success. In my opinion, the operational definition of my book is, for me, that it goes to a second edition. If they call and ask me to write a second edition, that to me means it was successful. If they don't, it's a failure. Now, does that mean the intrinsic content of the book is bad? No, because some of the greatest books ever written fell stillborn from the press, whereas some books are extraordinarily popular and sell a lot. Tens of thousands of copies. And they're not very good. So what should you do, oh fledgling author or author out there to do it again? You gotta just be true to your school. That's my advice. You gotta just be true to your school. Do the very best you can. Look for a good rationale, and then just work really hard to make it the best possible thing you can in the time that you have to do it with the resources available to you. Here are some of the key production personnel that were involved in my book. At Sage, the publisher, I had Margaret, who was my sponsoring editor. I had Sarah, who was her editorial assistant. Astrid was a person I've never met nor spoken to. This is a company located in Thousand Oaks, California, 3,000 miles from here, and I dealt with Astrid on an almost daily basis, twice a week, for months and months. Never met her, and we had a great time on the phone. So we did phone and we did email and had an incredible time. She understood what I was talking about. She gave me the time needed to describe why this semicolon needed to be over there and why this image had to be larger and all of that sort of rot. Todd was the sponsoring editor who took over when Margaret got sick. That can happen. Then you better cultivate Todd, because Todd will put that on the back burner. And it won't be that good. And so you got to convince Margaret to go talk to Todd if she can still speak. Margaret, she did not even know that she was sick until the doctor told she had a tough time finding the words, as she put it. A person who did anagrams, was a developmental editor for 30 years, had trouble finding the words, as she put it. And they said, oh, you had an ischemic episode. And so then she retired and Todd came in, but she had a chance to talk to Todd first. And she was great. Dia was the marketing guru of the book, and that means a couple of things. One, she has to go and talk to her sales staff and get them to understand what's happening. They may understand there are other books out there, they may understand lots of stuff, but they may not understand what the book is about. They may not know the content of the book. They may need a little education, a little bringing up to speed. And so lots of conversations with her, conference calls with the sales staff, and such. Jillian, copy editor, just to make sure that all book titles were in italics and or that sort of thing. Amber, also with marketing with Dia, helping with little day-to-day stuff while Dia was the overarching kind of producer-director. At Apple Corporation, I had to deal with Scott, Don, and Sue in the legal department. The two techies, Scott and Don, got me the Mac G5 so that I could learn to edit because, as Bob Dylan says, quote, I'll know my song well before I start singing. I had to know how to edit. I couldn't just write about editing and read a chapter about editing. I had to actually edit. So you saw an example of it, and that's a little bit of the relevance of why the video is the way it is. It was relevant to the book to do. And legal, Sue, I had to take what they call screenshots of various screens of what the Apple software looks like and put it in the book so that people could see, oh, I see that, oh yeah, check here, do this, drag that. and click this and down will fall that menu, etc. So I had to get all that signed off on. And on my end, I had the luck of two great grad students, Elvira and Ian, to do transcribing because I had 6 interviews that were long interviews. One with a person who worked for CBS News in Manhattan when 9/11 hit, a very poignant interview, an incredible interview, which is worthy of reading in its own right, and 5 others. My functions were not just to write a book and an instructor's resource manual, which meant that beyond chapters for writing the book, you're also going to include interviews, preface, acknowledgments, dedication, intro, table of contents, creating and or approving of cover art. It's a lot of stuff. It's not just writing chapters, so you got to really understand that there's, a meta shell around all of that. Editing copy is always coming back to me with complaints and suggestions. Xeroxing and postal and shooting photos. 90% of the photos in the book, and there are well over 100 of these images, I shot with a digital camera because it's a passion of mine, but it's also important to feature, in my opinion, just the exact single concept that you want to illustrate for the place it holds in the book. And other books that are out there that are doing better than mine for years, the other books have a flaw, in my opinion. The flaw is that they will give a photo that is ambiguous with regard to why is that photo there. And I'll show an example of that coming up. Preparing figures and captions, same kind of story. Sending and archiving emails. You need evidence. When Astrid loses something, you got to send it again. So that could happen. Managing assistants, preparing releases, because there's all kinds of legal forms, especially if you use photos that are permissions from other sources, and I'll show one of those. Formatting the IRM for a CD-ROM is different from formatting it for a book or a pamphlet or a folder or a folio. Preparing marketing documents, I had to educate the sales staff as to why this is a great thing for them to go and push. And participating in conference calls, responding to queries, and convincing publisher of needed updates. During the publication period, 18 months of writing, so many things happened. Example, the iPod went from audio to audio and video. Well, this now changes the digital platform significantly. People are now watching TV on iPods and on digital platforms. You have to put something in the book for that. And I saw it coming. They had no clue. And they said, well, that's not in the table of contents. I said, no, and it better be in the table of contents because otherwise we're obsolete before the book comes out. So that was another situation. Then the marketing. These slides are not as critical to our talk today, but they do give you a quick idea as to what I had to say to their sales staff. That's essentially me talking to their sales staff. First, I have to say, well, it's cheaper than the competition. So when you go talk to someone who uses the other book, tell them their students will save 30%. And I gave them, here's why I wrote it. It's more general. And so that is a part of the marketing is to teach the sales staff themselves why they should go push the book. This is the second page of the same thing. This is the way I explain to their sales staff, Dia and Amber, what to say to their people. And then finally, why it's better. You have to be very overt, very explicit. You should have a bullet list of reasons, say why this is better. And so that's what I did. Here's an image I shot of flowers in the foreground and a background that's somewhat clear to see, so its depth of field is pretty strong. When I have the next image, you can see that it's very dull. Depth of field is dull. I didn't do a single thing different except change the aperture setting. When the aperture is large, you have less depth of field. When the aperture is small, the light bends only through a smaller part of the lens, therefore it bends less, therefore it has more clarity and clear focus. So this is something I use to show that concept. It's a single concept, just to show one idea. And then finally, here's some images I had to buy. I couldn't get anyone to do this kind of makeup, to do wacky, wild, horror type theatrical makeup, so I bought these images. I did have some budget for that. Now I'd like to close and then open it up, of course, to your feedback with my little closing bit. This is another reason why TV can still be good, in my humble opinion. By the way, whenever we talk about judging the quality of something, on the scale of, good to bad, I always like to ask my students this question. I say, raise your hand if you believe some movies are better than others. And all hands go up. Well, I've got them. It's over at that point. Now it's just the fighting and haggling over what's on the continuum and where we place them. But we all have a continuum. No one ever says, all movies are of equal quality. No one ever says that. They never say that. So as soon as they're in that game, I think I've got them. And then it's time to play aesthetics and argument and debate. Robert Pirsig wrote a great book called The Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which I highly recommend, the central theme of which is, what is quality? What are standards of judgment? Do we have universals of human nature? Why is it that Lucy is a 50-year-old show and still making kids laugh who never met her, never heard of her, and didn't even live in that era, and they see the chocolate factory bit and they crack up? There are some universals of human nature. And with that, I leave you with this video.
Since 1966, as a Juilliard School graduate, I have been both music teacher and concert pianist at Westchester University in Westchester, Pennsylvania. Throughout my career, I have sought ways to help myself and my students avoid the threat of serious injury while engaging in repetitive motion required when performing on the concert stage. In 1992, I added to my expertise as a student of the FM Alexander technique a total body approach to performing more safely any skill requiring repetitive motion. The Alexander technique has changed my life as both musician and piano teacher. With the Alexander technique, I have helped myself and my students improve proficiency playing the piano while reducing the threat of injury that can and has ended serious musical careers.
How long does it take to get there from your house?
I can, if I go through the alleyways, I can get there in 12 minutes. I first learned of the Alexander technique from a small pamphlet written by an Ivy League professor. Alexander discovered a certain relationship between the head, neck, and torso that can significantly increase one's overall coordination, resulting in increased efficiency. Through the Alexander technique, I have achieved a greater mechanical advantage when playing the piano. For the last 15 years, I have incorporated the Alexander technique into my teaching and performing, and I have seen students attain unprecedented leaps forward as a result of their learning to incorporate Alexander's principles into their own practice. I have been a certified teacher of the Alexander technique since 1992. Over time, I have come to see Alexander's insights as a form of visceral intelligence, one that leads me to a feeling of kinesthetic lightness when I play. When I bring my head, neck, and torso into the proper relationship, my overall coordination improves. I play better while reducing fatigue. Through the Alexander technique, I better integrate my actions with my nervous system, resulting in greater mastery over the piano when I practice and perform. Since the early 90s, I have worked to move my music students to greater awareness of their own sensations when playing, resulting in enhanced overall performance with fewer injuries. One great advantage of the Alexander technique is that it eventually becomes possible for students to apply it themselves without the need for outside support. Brush, brush, change the hand. Wouldn't catch you dead doing that, right? You'd never do that, right? Why? It feels awkward, doesn't it? So why bother with it? There's a good reason to bother with it. You begin to improve your coordination. You know, what do you think? I always play the piano this way. Sounds good, people clap, I win competitions, I get into schools, everything. Why don't you try it another way? Look for it. Feels good. Maybe you get better. The trained Alexander student is better able to sense the onset of pain and soreness from repetitive motion and make it disappear. One way to think of the benefit of the Alexander technique is to think of a spider web with all its artful symmetry. When a fly gets caught in the web, suddenly the entire web becomes misshapen when a small part of it gets pinched. If we relieve the spot where the fly is, the entire structure resumes its natural shape. Similarly, if we learn to use our head, neck, and torso properly, we can regain natural coordination, making all of our activities easier to accomplish. That way, if there is a stressor in the way we perform at the piano, a fly pinched in our web, so to speak, we can use the Alexander technique so that the pain that might result doesn't get a chance. And, unlike turning to chiropractors, massage therapists, and acupuncturists, Alexander practitioners do not remain passive and ignorant about how to repair and ward off future onset of pain. In short, with the Alexander technique, you relieve and release your own pain on your own. By bringing together expertise in both music performance and the Alexander technique, I have seen the potential for improvement skyrocket. That is my calling, my mission.
Open to all comments, questions, and sharing. Thank you.
They might come stupid, but the first is who's adopted your book so far, or is it too new and no one has? And the second question is who funded the project? Because didn't you say you had like extra money to pay for the copyrights and stuff? How did you get your funding?
The publisher gave me a signature advance, which I used to purchase a Canon XL2 camera and a tripod. And I bought a box of lights with my own money. And then I managed to convince Apple Corporation to gift me the Apple G5 and the Final Cut Pro software, because I said to them I would feature their materials in my book. And that's how I got Sue, the legal counsel, to allow me to use all the screenshots that I wanted.
So they gave you like an advance with the assumption that your book is going to make money because they like your idea?
Yeah, I mean, they like the idea, and the people at Apple, you have to understand the background is interesting. The people at Apple created this Final Cut Pro stuff, which the competitor to Final Cut Pro for years on end before Final Cut Pro entered the market was a $100,000 program by Avid. And people, I mean, Final Cut Pro costs $1,000. So to be able to throw something out there, which is, I don't know, 70, 80, 90% as good as Avid in terms of the ability to, am I saying that right, Paul, because you used Avids? Would you say that the percentage of capability in the Final Cut Pro is comparable to Avid?
Final Cut Pro is certainly more intuitive and philosophical differences.
Yeah.
Avid did engineering station, very anal, and Final Cut Pro is very intuitive, very
easier to use, you're saying?
Very more democratic.
Yeah. So they were able to put a competitive item on the market to go head-to-head 1% to 99 times as expensive, and that was just an amazing entry to the market economically. In terms of affordability, amplification, a huge plus, and it allowed a lot of people to become their own editors. It's a magical thing to have that happen that quick.
So then Apple likes your idea, and the book company likes your idea, and then so they think, okay, so then they give you an advance to work with, and then you get a certain percentage every time someone buys a book?
There's like a 15% agreement after X number are sold, because they have to make back the signature advance.
Okay, cool. I was just curious.
Carol.
I was curious, in the very beginning you started with a caveat that we needed to ask ourselves who was making this and why and who was paying, etc. So I was curious, given the clips that you showed us of your own work, will you share some of your motivation with us?
Yes.
It's not often we get a chance to actually query the producer and director.
Right. I follow a simple rule. It's 2 words from Hebrew. It's called tikkun olam, which means to repair the world and to just make the world a better place, to leave it for my kids in a way that might be better than it was before we started. Aristotle has it also as, quote, worthy of contemplation. So those are the things that push me to do what I do. I find someone who's great at something, and I want to show it to the world. I want to reveal that person's secrets. So Harry Havnuni and the bike maker, it's an obvious case for tikkun olam. He has been doing this for 30 years and knows his stuff. And I asked him, after being a pal of his for a long, long time, he let me into his, background to see the front stage, backstage kind of dichotomy, and to then win his trust enough to be able to allow me to reveal his secrets to the world. So that's what motivates me.
You began these productions in the context of writing a book. You were involved in production prior.
Yes, I was, but not with very good stuff, because I was working in an analog environment, and I was working with very rudimentary editing capability because of the access to equipment, which became incredible. It became so much better. So the first one that I had from years ago, I actually used to motivate Harry to allow me to, to let him feel like he trusted me enough to not waste his time. So I actually did use an older one of, believe it or not, a medallic sculptor who works for the U.S. Mint. He allowed me to learn how he does his plaster casts and his modeling in clay before he casts them, even before they go to the mint for striking. And that's the one I did earlier.
Well, I would imagine it would be somewhat of a tough sell to, because with all the teachers of communication, film and video production, there are many, quite a few books out there. They may not be all quite digital.
That's correct.
So I guess
the niche.
You had a competitive edge in terms of getting in there.
Yeah, luckily, yes. I also found out that
theoretical.
Yeah, I also found out that just by pure luck, that the person against whom I'm competing has quit. He's retired after his 9th edition. He's not doing another one. And everyone knows that Samuelson's Economics in its 18th edition, if something becomes a standard text after its 3rd or 4th edition, the Zettel text, as it's called, is the standard Bible of video production. So I am really, what's the name of the guy who tilts at windmills? Yeah, that's what I'm kind of like in that regard, except that he's a generation older than I am, and he's stopped. He can't do it anymore, which is great. I mean, that's a good lucky moment for me. But again, you have to go with the first couple of slides I showed, stillborn from the press versus the other book that could be so much sales. You can't worry about that sort of thing while you're in your moment. You just have to go ahead and say, I'm going to do my level best to make the best possible book I can make intrinsically, and then we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I remember some of the early texts back in the 70s.
Yes. Well, I learned on Zettel's 2nd edition. In the early 70s, I learned on Zettel's 2nd edition. So he was my Bible for a long time. Yeah.
So when you were actually writing the book, I mean, obviously you had already established a relationship with the publisher, and they probably had in mind who the potential audience would be. But when you were actually writing the text, and over the couple of years, who did you have in mind? Was it the undergraduate student in the class who would be using this as a textbook, or would it be, say, the person who does this because it's fun?
Practitioners.
Practitioner.
Yeah, I had in mind main audience was going to be upper level undergrads and graduate students who like video, who like media, who like production, who want to do documentary, all of that, who learn it. There are somewhere around, 2,000 colleges and universities across America, and hundreds of them have this program. They have either a studio facility or they have a bunch of cameras ready to go out in the field, shoot raw footage, and come back and do post-production editing. I had in mind them as my primary audience. Practitioners is an extra icing on the cake. What about you and your feelings about your own experience with living through this change in the last 10 years? If you have children, aren't you crazy when they get on IMing? What do you feel is a big contributor to your changes in your world?
I'm just very curious. I mean, I think just the way I've changed, even just in the last 5 years, is kind of the way my parents probably changed over a period of 30, 40 years. I mean, I don't have a house line because I have a cell phone. I don't have a TV, partly because I would like to think I'm like pseudo-ascetic, but it's because I watch YouTube and other things off of the internet. I just don't have a television, and like last night, I was like, I'm kind of a Mennonite anarchist, so I'm not too interested in the candidates, but you could just look up like Ron Paul or something like that.
Alternatives.
You'll get, like, all these people,
Yeah.
but then you could get like some guy in his basement give like a pretty thorough critique over 10 minutes on YouTube. I mean, I'm really curious. I really think people are still pretty sociologically kind of frail. Like, the fact that we voted in George Bush a second time is kind of unclear in the sense of, like, you wonder how people really process information even when it's really available. So I'm not sure the ubiquity of, like, internet video of how much it's going to really change things.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, but I'm very well aware that, like, you know, media is way more available to people, but whether people are accessing it is...
And we know Howard Dean raised a lot of money through the internet and immediately lost because of the Scream.
That whole thing, yeah. You almost wonder if we become even more fickle.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the amplification issue again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, a question back there.
Just experience-wise, I have a 17-year-old who his band is already signed with iTunes. I mean, of course, you don't get the volume. I mean, he gets the same amount per download as anybody real famous. But if anybody told me, my 17-year-old was going to be doing this stuff. Of course, I can't get him to read the next book that he's got to do a book report on. I'm constantly pushing it, but it's.
And how can you even think that a book will even be popular in this day and age?
Yeah,
You can get everything online. I mean, I must be crazy. Is a lot of the time what I was thinking. But they also said that 15 years ago that computers would make paper passé, and now I go into Borders and I see the computer section is larger than the cookbook section. So it's really kind of flippy and fickle, if you will,